Hi everybody, it's Maureen of Maureen97 Designs, and I got my sew sampler for this month, October of 2020, and I'm not going to do an unboxing because I think there's a bunch of them already on YouTube, and I don't think I'd be able to do a better job than any of them. So what I did want to show you though, and spoiler alerts coming up here, so if you don't want to see what's inside the box, turn off or stop the video. I did want to show you what I'm going to be doing with the pattern from this month's box. So as you might already know, it's La Casita, and not La Casita, and you can either make a wall hanging or a table runner. Well, for me, neither of those is really ideal, because I just don't really need either one of them. So I decided I was gonna do the project. I actually really like the fabrics, so I already went ahead and starched them and ironed them, and I'm actually using some of my own fabric to go with it. Instead of doing both the dark and light with the material from the box, I'm actually using this. I don't know if you can see. No, you can't. It actually has a really light white pattern on it. It's a white on white pattern. They're just like tiny little flowers, I think. And so I'm using that as my light, and then I'm using the fabric from the box as my darks. And I actually took some time to figure out how everything is going to work, and I believe I am going to get 30 of the 6.5 inch courthouse steps blocks out of the fabric in the box and my little bit of extra. So it's still not going to be like a really big quilt, but maybe a small lap size or something like that. We'll see. Unfortunately, I already ordered the finishing kit for the box, which has, I believe, like a yard of fabric for the borders and binding, or maybe 1 yard each, or I don't know, but anyway, it already has a little bit for borders and binding, which isn't going to be enough because I'm making a bigger quilt. So I haven't gotten my box yet, and I haven't obviously put together all my blocks yet. So once I finish my blocks and I get my finishing kit, I'm going to figure out what else I'm going to do with my project. So I'll have another video to update you on what I ended up doing with that finishing kit, and hopefully show you my finished, or if it's not completely finished, at least I can show you my finished quilt top. But anyway, so I was looking at these courthouse steps. These are new to me, and apparently they're a new product to It's So Emma. And I went ahead and watched the video done by Fat Quarter Shop, and I thought it was kind of complicated. Sorry. I mean, I can see how you can sort of get into the rhythm of it and get used to it, and it'll go faster and faster as you keep doing them. But I actually happen to have a 6-inch log cabin trim tool. Let me show you that. From Creative Grids. So I'm going to actually be using this for my courthouse steps. You can actually do a log cabin courthouse steps or a half log cabin with this, and it'll finish at 6.5 inches, which will be 6 inches sewn. So it's exactly the same size as these courthouse steps papers. So that's really handy. And then, like I said, I figured out how to cut my strips, my fabrics, to make 30 blocks. So I wanted to show you. I actually came up with a diagram. Sorry, it's a little crumpled. But I came up with this diagram for how I'm going to cut my blocks. And, oh, let me zoom out a little bit. This is a 10 by 10 square, which we have 20 of them in the box. I'm going to use 15 of them to cut like this. So I'm cutting 1.5 inch strips up into the 6 inch mark, and then I'm cutting the 2 by 2 squares off the top, and then I'm cutting the rest into 1.5 inch strips, and then I have this little bit left over. And this I'm not actually cutting. You need 3¼ inch strips and 5-inch strips, and I'm not cutting them exactly to 3¼ and a 5-inch strips because I want to have the extra for the way that I put my blocks together. So what I'm doing is I'm just cutting it at 5½ inches so that each of the strips will be a little bit larger. And you may have noticed if you looked at the pattern for the foundation piecing paper has a 1½ inch square as its middle. But for my trim tool, they use a 2x2 square. So that's why I had to alter the cutting pattern to be able to get my 2x2 squares out of there. So you can see I already started cutting. Here's my 2-inch squares. These are my short strips, my medium strips, and my long strips. And you can see I'll get 2 middles. You need 2 of the strips for each block. So I'll get 2 out of this, 2 out of this, but only 1 out of the 7¼ inch strip. So what I'm doing is I'm taking the last 5 10x10 squares and I'm cutting those into my 1½ by 7¼ or I'm probably just going to cut it all into 1½ inch strips and then just have the extra and cut off the extra when I do my trimming. So that is my plan. I hope that helps you understand what I'm doing, but basically I'm just going to do that. And one really helpful tool that I am using with all of this is the Stripology XL, because it has I can do the 1½ inch, the 1½, the 3, the 4½, and the 6, and then I cut that, and then I actually put my Stripology away and I cut the rest manually. I cut my 2x2 squares manually and then these 2 1½ inch strips manually. And then when I'm assembling, I'll show you that process in just a minute, but I actually use scissors to cut my strips down. For my white fabric, I have just cut 1½ inch strips. I haven't subcut them at all. These are 1½ by width of fabric, and I just cut those down with my scissors because it's really fast and easy. And let me show you my process. Okay, so here's how this works with the trim tool. I take one of the 2½ inch squares, and then the first layer I'm doing is the light fabric. So I'm just going to take this, and I don't need that selvage, so I'm just going to trim that off with my scissors. And then I'm going to take it, this is face up right now. It's kind of difficult with this fabric to tell which is the right side of the fabric, but it does actually have a right side of the fabric. So I'm just going to trim this. And if you saw, I made a video on my 10-inch log cabin trim tool duo, and this is the same process pretty much. So I just trim with the scissors, and I don't care if I'm lining it up exactly with the edge, because that is all going to get trimmed off later when I trim after each round with the trim tool. And that's a lot of saying trim. And basically what you do is you just sew your 1/4 inch, and then I'm going to turn it around, cut my strip for the other side, sew my 1/4 inch, and then I'm going to have something like this once I open up those seams. So I have this now, and then I'm going to take my short strips, and I'm actually doing just kind of a hodgepodge mix here, so I'm cutting up all my strips ahead of time. And then I'm just going to pick out from here what I want to use. And obviously I don't want to use the same pattern. Well, not obviously, but I don't want to use the same pattern as the center block. So I'm going to pick 2 of a different fabric. And then it's going to be the same thing where I'm just going to line it up with the edges. And you can see, because I didn't cut those white strips exactly the same length as the middle square, I'm going to, when I line up this fabric, I'm going to line it up only with the middle square and not with those white pieces. And you might be a little bit worried that it's not going to line up correctly on the edges, but it will, because you know your strip is straight, the square is straight and it's big enough for you to line up against, and if you want to you can pin this, but then basically you just sew it your 1/4 inch seam, flip it to the other side, line it up with that center square, and sew your 1/4 inch seam. And then you're going to get something like this, which I've already added the next round of white strips, but let me show you how the trimming works. Hold on a minute. Okay, so when you sew on your dark strips and then you open it up, it's going to look like this, but just to let you know, this is what it looks like closed. Those white strips, because they weren't trimmed exactly, are kind of sticking out on both sides, but it didn't matter because I sewed a straight line and I lined up my pattern with the middle square like I said I was going to do. So I'm just going to press these open, and then this is where the trimming comes in. So let me get my trim tool out and I'll show you exactly how it works. So on the trim tool, it shows right here there's a black square and it says round 1 in it. So what you're going to do is you're going to line up this black square with your center, which was the 2 by 2 inch center. It's now a little bit smaller, but it started off as a 2 by 2, but this is going to fit it now as it's sewn because you did round 1. And a round on the courthouse steps is when you put strips on all 4 sides of your middle square. So I'm going to take that and I'm going to put my square there, put that round 1 square over my middle square, and now I'm going to hold it down and trim the 2 sides. And then I'm going to turn it over 180 degrees, line up that center square again, and trim the other 2 sides. And it's very important that your center square be exactly the right size when you start, so that you will be able to line it up correctly with every round of trimming that you do. So now we have a perfect square again. Let me zoom out a little. We're back to a perfect square, and it's the same exact process. We're going to take our white fabric, line it up with the edge, and again, it doesn't have to be perfect. I'm just going to take my scissors and trim it off, and I can do the other side right now and take this all to my machine. And you can actually just double up your strip if you really wanted to and cut them both at the same time, because they're going to be basically the same length is what you're going to need. So I'm going to take that to my sewing machine and sew those with the 1/4 inch seam, and then I'm going to have something like this. And then I'm going to go through my middle length strips and pick something to go with this, and I can pick, let's see what looks good. I like this one. So you just keep going around and around, and after I add these, I'll have my 4 strips again, and that's when I trim. When I trim this time, I'm going to use the round 2 square, which I don't know if you can see that. Yeah, it's white. It's a white square. So you line up your center with that white square this time, trim on 2 sides, turn it over, line it up again with the round 2 square, and trim on the other 2 sides, and you're back to your perfect square again. So you can see that even if you are sewing these on crooked, when you trim them up, as long as you're not like super crooked, when you trim it up, it's gonna end up a perfect square, and it's gonna make straight edges for you to sew on the next round of strips. And it may look a little bit crooked if you sew it on crooked, but those edges will be perfectly straight and you'll have a perfect square. So I'm just going to sew on my last set of strips for another block, and I'll show you what we do at the end. Okay, so I've sewn on my final strips for my last round, and it's 3 rounds when you do the log cabin or the courthouse steps. If you're doing the half log cabin, it has 6 rounds. So this is exactly how it came out of the sewing machine, with the white ends sticking out. This one is kind of flat, but this side you can see is sticking out, and these ends are way sticking out. So I'm just going to press those open, And you would want to use either a pressing tool, like the Lori Holt pressing tool, or you'd want to iron. So this is the last round. I'm going to take my log cabin tool and I'm going to use round 3. You can see there's the round 3 in the middle, and it's a black square again. So I'm going to line up that black square with my center. And then this time I'm actually going to cut all the way around the trim tool. I don't have to rotate the fabric because the trim tool is the exact size of 6.5 inches. So that's why I took out my rotary cutting mat, because it makes it very easy to cut all 4 sides without moving your trim tool. So there we go, and that's our finished block. And it's exactly 6.5 inches, just like it would be with the foundation piecing, paper piecing sheets. But to me, I think this is a lot easier, and you get just great results. You can see my strips are a little bit wonky. I might have ironed my fabric a little wonky. I might have sewn it on a little wonky. But in the end, I have a perfect square, and it looks like a courthouse steps. So I'm really happy with the way this turns out. Anyway, I'm going to finish trimming, finish sewing, everything. Hopefully I'll get my box in the mail soon from Fat Quarter Shop with my finishing kit, and then I'll be back with an update. So thank you very much for watching. I'll see you next time.